The 911 dispatcher audibly sighed when Linda screamed through the phone that I was holding my cabin hostage. She claimed I was armed with sarcasm and bad taste. 2 sheriff deputies trudged up my gravel drive to find me, Ray Dri, 59 years old, calmly roasting marshmallows in my flannel robe while holding a copy of Walden and feeding peanuts to my pet squirrel Jerry. Behind them, Linda Creswell, president of the Mountain View Estates HOA, was flailing her arms like an inflatable tube man having a panic attack. She shouted with a shrill voice that I had refused to hand over my cabin and called it emotional kidnapping. I just blinked at the officers and explained in my calmest tone that she had asked to borrow my vacation home. I said no. She called it anti-community behavior. Then she showed up with a duffel bag, a mini golden doodle, and a bottle of pinot grigio and literally tried to move in. The deputies looked at each other. One muttered under his breath something about another HOA situation that I won't repeat here, but you can imagine what he said. The other deputy was trying not to laugh as Linda continued her theatrical performance behind them, now claiming I had created a hostile living environment for the entire neighborhood by simply existing in my own space. I had retired early from a 32-year career in HVAC and bought a modest cabin on the edge of the forest in Aspen Hollow, a sleepy mountain community where most residents use their HOA newsletter as fire kindling. The cabin sat on 3 acres of pine-covered land, far enough from the main neighborhood that I could barely see another house through the trees. I enjoyed silence, grilled trout, and reading existential philosophy to Jerry, who seemed to understand Sartre better than most humans I knew. I kept to myself, paid my dues on time every single month without fail, and maintained my yard so meticulously that it could have made landscaping magazines weep with joy. My life was beautifully simple. I woke up with the sun, made coffee in my old percolator that had belonged to my father, and spent my mornings on the porch watching the deer pass through. Afternoons were for woodworking in my shop, where I crafted furniture pieces that I never sold but gave away to neighbors who actually respected boundaries. Evenings belonged to Books and Jerry, who had learned to knock on my window with an acorn when he wanted his dinner peanuts. Enter Linda Creswell, the recently self-appointed emergency interim HOA president for life after a mysterious coup involving lemon bars and what I suspected was ballot tampering at the last community meeting. Several board members had mysteriously gotten food poisoning the night before the vote, leaving only Linda's carefully selected allies to attend. Linda lived 3 houses down in a Tuscan-style monstrosity she called Villa Serenity, though there was nothing serene about it. She had installed motion-activated fountains that played classical music, wind chimes that could be heard from space, and security lights that turned night into day for a 3-block radius. She once filed a noise complaint over the sound of snowfall. Her license plate actually read KAREN1, which should have been everyone's first warning sign. The trouble started when Linda first emailed me to request temporary use of my cabin for her mental health recovery vacation. The email was 17 paragraphs long, single-spaced, with color-coded highlighting and footnotes. She explained in exhausting detail how she had been mildly inconvenienced at a Pilates class when someone had taken her preferred spot near the mirror. This transgression had apparently triggered what she called a cascade of wellness disruptions that required immediate intervention in a rustic setting. She included a proposed schedule for her cabin usage, complete with meal plans she expected me to stock and a cleaning schedule I was supposed to maintain during her stay. I declined her request politely but firmly, explaining that the cabin was my personal retreat and not available for lending. My response was 2 sentences long. Her reply came back within 3 minutes and was longer than some novels I had read. Linda's response came swiftly and vindicatively. First came a violation notice for unsanctioned wildlife harboring, referring to Jerry the squirrel who had been visiting my property for 3 years. The notice included blurry photos of Jerry eating peanuts, and what Linda called documentary evidence of unauthorized feeding schedules. Then a second notice arrived for unauthorized rustic decor, which apparently meant my neatly stacked firewood pile that she claimed was creating an aggressively rural atmosphere inconsistent with community standards. The third notice, and I am not making this up, cited me for unneighborly vibes. She had actually created a subsection in the HOA bylaws about vibrational disruptions and energy field violations. She began loitering outside my house with binoculars and a clipboard, muttering into a walkie-talkie that was almost certainly not connected to anything. I watched from my window as she photographed my mailbox from 17 different angles while speaking urgently into the dead device about code violations and aesthetic terrorism. She brought a measuring tape and documented that my garden hose was coiled counterclockwise instead of clockwise, which she claimed was passive-aggressive landscaping. Her surveillance expanded daily. She installed what she called a community wellness camera pointed directly at my driveway, though I was fairly certain that wasn't legal. She started a neighborhood watch specifically for my street, though she was the only member. She created a 47-page document called the Dupree dossier, which she accidentally sent to the entire HOA mailing list instead of just her cousin on the board. Then came the community wellness checks. Linda appeared at my door uninvited every morning at exactly 7:15 for a week, holding herbal tea and reciting affirmations in a syrupy sweet voice like a yoga cultist who had lost touch with reality. She would say things like your chakras seem misaligned and your aura is affecting property values. She brought crystals that she tried to leave on my porch to cleanse the negative energy she claimed was emanating from my property. Each time, I politely declined her tea and her concerns, closing the door while she stood there chanting about community synergy and collaborative living solutions. On the fourth day, she brought backup in the form of her life coach, a woman named Meadow who wore so many scarves she looked like a walking fabric store. Meadow attempted to perform what she called an intervention for acute introversion, reading from a script about the dangers of excessive solitude and the healing power of forced socialization. I closed the door mid-sentence, but could hear them outside for another 20 minutes performing some kind of blessing ritual that involved a tambourine. The weekend everything escalated. I drove up to my cabin for some peace and quiet. The drive usually calmed me, winding through mountain roads with nothing but trees and sky. But when I arrived, I found Linda's Range Rover parked in my spot. Not just near my cabin, but literally in the space where I always parked, like she had been studying my habits. I found her inside, already making herself at home. She was wrapped in my Pendleton throw blanket, the one my late wife had given me 20 years ago, lighting a lavender candle on my coffee table and rearranging my furniture to improve the feng shui. She chirped in her most entitled voice that she assumed my no was a negotiation tactic. She claimed HOA presidents have discretionary authority over community assets during wellness emergencies. She was sipping Chardonnay from my good glasses, the crystal ones I never used but kept in the cabinet for memories. She had brought 3 suitcases, a yoga mat, a juice cleaner, and somehow had already hung a vision board in my kitchen. She informed me with a bright smile that she had taken the liberty of creating a sharing schedule where I could use my own cabin on alternating weekends, provided I submitted a request in writing at least 2 weeks in advance. She had even brought a contract she had drawn up, probably with help from some online template, that would make me a guest in my own property. The document referred to her as the wellness coordinator and me as the property steward, which essentially meant I would maintain the place while she used it whenever she felt stressed, which seemed to be always. I calmly pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's department. I explained the situation in measured tones while Linda shrieked in the background about emotional extortion and weaponized solitude. She grabbed her own phone and started live streaming, narrating to her 12 followers about the violence of boundaries and the trauma of being denied access to healing spaces. That's when she dialed 911, claiming she was being held against her will by my aggressive introversion. She actually used the phrase held hostage by toxic masculinity, even though all I was doing was standing there holding my phone and waiting for the deputies. She demanded what she called a civilian tribunal under HOA bylaws, which I'm pretty sure she invented on the spot. She claimed that as HOA president, she had sovereign immunity within the community boundaries and that the sheriff had no jurisdiction over what she called a civil wellness dispute. She started citing made-up legal codes and referencing court cases that sounded like she had pulled them from television shows. The deputies arrived within 20 minutes. One asked Linda if she had a key to my cabin. She reached into her purse and handed him a rock that she had painted to look like a key. She explained with complete seriousness that it was a symbolic key representing community access and shared consciousness. The deputy stared at it for a long moment, then looked at his partner with an expression that said everything without words. They gently but firmly escorted her off my property while I sat quietly on my porch, sipping chamomile tea and feeding Jerry a peanut. Linda resisted, not physically but verbally, delivering what she probably thought was a powerful speech about the militarization of property rights and the oppression of community healers. She demanded badge numbers, threatened to call the mayor whom she claimed was her second cousin, and insisted this would be featured in her wellness blog that she swore had thousands of readers. The deputies remained professional, though I caught one trying not to smile when she declared my cabin a sacred healing space that belonged to all beings. But Linda wasn't done. Within an hour of being removed, she had uploaded a YouTube video called Cabin Karen: I Was Held Hostage by Introversion. When I checked later that evening, it had 14 views, and I strongly suspected 13 of them were from her own burner accounts. In the video, she ranted for 47 minutes about the tyranny of private property and how my refusal to share my cabin was literally violence. She wore a flower crown and clutched a tissue box, occasionally dabbing at completely dry eyes while describing her trauma in detail. She created a GoFundMe page for what she called her recovery from property violence, seeking $50,000 for therapy and a wellness retreat in Sedona. The description claimed I had created a hostile environment through what she termed aggressive boundary setting and militant introversion. No one donated except someone named Anonymous who gave $1 with a comment that just said, "OL." The deputies, doing their due diligence, reviewed her HOA violation reports and discovered she had issued 147 of them in the past month alone. The most bizarre part was that most of them were addressed to herself, citing infractions like spiritual trespassing and failure to manifest positive energy. One report accused her own garden gnome of looking judgmental. Another claimed her neighbor's cat was performing unlicensed energy work. She had filed 12 complaints about birds singing off-key and disrupting her morning manifestations. Her complaint history was a masterpiece of escalating delusion. She had tried to fine someone for having pessimistic thoughts near community property. She had issued warnings for unauthorized happiness during designated quiet mindfulness hours she had invented. One poor neighbor received a violation for their choice of doormat, which Linda claimed was sending subliminal negative messages to visitors. At the next HOA meeting, which was called as an emergency session, Linda arrived wearing what appeared to be a fake HOA Marshall badge she had purchased from Etsy. It was comically large and said, "Marshall," in Comic Sans font. She also wore a sash that read, "President for Life," and carried a gavel she had bought from a costume store. She demanded the floor and began a presentation about expanding presidential powers to include property redistribution for mental health emergencies. Her presentation included a PowerPoint with animated transitions and clip art from the 90s. She had created an organizational chart that showed her at the top with the title of Supreme Wellness Coordinator, with all other residents listed as wellness subjects. She proposed a new system where she could commandeer any property for up to 30 days if she deemed it necessary for community healing. She had even designed ID cards for what she called the Wellness Enforcement Squad, which consisted of just her and Meadow. That's when the board treasurer stood up and read a motion for her removal. The vote was unanimous, even from the member who was her cousin, who later admitted he had only supported her initially because she had promised to stop calling him at 3 a.m. with her wellness emergencies. The look on Linda's face when the vote was announced was like watching someone realize their fortune cookie lied to them. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, and she dropped her oversized gavel, which made a sad plastic thunk on the floor. The county sheriff attended the meeting and officially declared her a chronic disruptor of rural peace. He explained that she would be fined for trespassing, misuse of emergency services, and impersonating a municipal officer. The fine totaled $12,000. Linda's face turned 3 shades of purple as she screamed that we would all regret this betrayal, her voice cracking as she knocked over a pitcher of lemonade and stormed out, her fake badge clattering to the floor behind her.